For any procedure that can kill and injure, you must give people choice. The existing and emerging science linking vaccines to chronic illness and neurodevelopmental damage is devastating. Conflicts of interest have changed the rules of the game and no longer protect our children. Drug companies and doctors are protected from most liability related to vaccine injury and death.
Now, vaccines, for the most part, children's vaccines, are mandatory. That's real extremism.
One of our basic human rights is that we should have control of what goes into our bodies, and mandates are violating this basic human right.
And the only way that vaccines work as they do right now is because they're mandated, right? Kids can't go to school unless they comply.
The vast majority of hospitals around the country are implementing exemption policies for vaccines for their employees that violate federal law. And this really concerns me. They're overly aggressive in requiring vaccines and not allowing people to refuse vaccines, in many cases, who have a valid legal right to refuse the vaccines.
Research community, the medical community, saying, look, what we need to provide the public is good information, and let them make the decision based on facts. We have the emergency community, the Homeland Security, Federal Emergency Management Agency people talking about forced vaccinations, forced quarantines, basically the politicians running the show instead of the people who are from the medical community.
I've talked with healthcare workers from all over the country, and they report to me, they see the vaccine damage firsthand. They see their coworkers, and in many cases, the healthcare workers that call me themselves report vaccine injuries. And this is why we see more and more healthcare workers objecting to mandatory vaccines in the workplace.
There are new laws that have been passed which even require a registry of children who are not vaccinated, their parents. This is getting close to a kind of a Stalinist regime.
If the current aggressive agenda for vaccines continues playing out, and this amounts to more and more people being required to get more and more vaccines with no end in sight, we are moving in the direction of what I can only call a vaccine police state.
In a democracy where citizens are expected to be able to make choices for themselves, the government is instead telling people what to do, requiring people what to do. And that itself makes a lot of people unhappy, especially when there are hazards involved.
The pharmaceutical industry and the government promotes vaccines by telling the public these are safe and effective. That's what they say. And yet, legally speaking, they're unavoidably unsafe.
It's an established medical and legal fact that vaccines cause permanent disability and death. Officials from the FDA, CDC, and the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons have all said that something on the order of 90 to 99% of vaccine adverse events are never even reported. So we really have no idea, no hard data to tell us what the scope of vaccine injury and death is. Therefore, it's impossible to make a calculation about whether or not there's a net benefit from vaccines.
So there's a real contradiction here at the core of vaccine policy and law. But if they're really as safe and effective as they tell us they are, then surely everyone will opt for them. Surely a market would handle this.
Going back 3 centuries, there have been a huge variety of conflicts over all kinds of vaccines where people have rioted, people have fought in their legislatures, often successfully, to contest vaccines and their mandating.
Mandatory why? Well, the story is that if 95% of the population isn't vaccinated, there won't be so-called herd immunity. You can't have 95% of the population immune if the children's vaccines only give you immunity for 2 to 10 years. That means that most adults, in fact, are not immune. Well, but it's a very potent weapon. It's a justification for mandating vaccines, because if everyone who is vaccinated but who may have a neighboring child who's not vaccinated, they might be at risk. This is the way the argument goes. But it does have power to persuade states to force vaccines on children.
I'm hearing from people around the country saying that pediatricians are just flat out refusing to treat any child who's not vaccinated, whether parents have a legal exemption or not. And in many cases, I believe this is actually violating parents' constitutional rights.
Public health monies from the federal government can be dependent on state compliance rates. So for instance, in New York City public schools, we've found letters on the internet from the health department to principals that state if your school doesn't have a compliance rate of 98%, i.e., your vaccine compliance rate, you personally, the principal personally can be fined because the school district, the health department will get less money from the federal government.
Well, Obamacare has language that provides grants to states for promoting vaccines that includes things such as having people go door to door.
Unless you think the American people are just incredibly stupid, which I suppose you could make a case for, but it's not a case that I find very compelling, that we can look back and see that the masses of citizens in this country have thought in a very wise way and in a very democratic way about the proper role of vaccines and vaccine mandates in American history.
The federal government subsidizes vaccine research and development to the tune of billions of dollars each year. The federal government passed laws removing the vaccine manufacturers from liability from the death and disability caused by their products. State and federal governments mandate vaccines. State and federal governments purchase vaccines. And the federal government compensates those people who manage to successfully get through the vaccine injury compensation program. This is the biggest racket anywhere on the planet. I don't know of any other industry that has this kind of support from government.
The science, some of the science at the CDC may well have been fraudulent.
Paul Thorson, who was one of the study authors in the 2003 study that's been informally referred to as the Danish study, was hired by the CDC to pull together research to show that vaccines don't cause autism.
What steps has the CDC undertaken to ensure the integrity of the research that was performed by Dr. Thorson, who, as you know, has been indicted for misconduct and misallocation of resources?
Dr. Thorson, who was a co-investigator on a couple of studies that came out on autism, was really just one investigator, and that body of evidence related to vaccines and autism.
All right. Have you gone back to validate the variety of studies he participated in? I mean, you know this guy is a humongous scumbag, one of the most wanted men on earth, and you relied upon him for data to determine whether thimerosal had a negative effect. One of the witnesses told me that the fugitive doctor had been involved in a couple studies with CDC, and I have information here that he was involved in 21 of the 24 studies, and I would like to submit that to the record.
In April of 2011, Paul Thorson was indicted on 13 counts of fraud and 9 counts of money laundering with the CDC, calling into question, as far as I'm concerned, all of his research supposedly showing that vaccines don't cause autism.
As far as we can see, the U.S. government has done almost nothing to bring this man back to justice and to find out what's going on.
Simpsonwood was the transcripts of a secret meeting that was held between CDC and representatives of the vaccine industry, in which they reviewed a report that CDC had ordered, the Verstraeten study, of the 100,000 children in the United States vaccine safety database, which they are talking about the undeniability of the connection between autism and thimerosal, the impossibility of massaging the data further in order to try to eliminate those signals. That's what they spend the first 2 hours. The rest of the meeting they spend talking about how do we hide this from the press, from the public, and what they call the predatory bar.
And if really these vaccines are so safe and effective as they're being sold as being, then why should they mind if there's no liability protection.
Protection from liability is giving companies no incentive to develop safer products.
One solution would be repeal the 1986 law, right? If the law were repealed, people could sue manufacturers directly. My guess is we'd see a lot safer vaccines.
They're going to consider their bottom line ahead of the safety.
You can't have it both ways. They can't be unavoidably unsafe and safe and effective at the same time.
Merck, GlaxoSmithKline, they have been forced into settlements, multi-billion-dollar settlements. And guess what? They're repeat offenders.
Vaccine policy and law is being driven by the pharmaceutical industry. We need to understand what that means. This is an industry that routinely engages in criminal behavior. In 2012, Glaxo got a $1 billion criminal fine. In 2009, Pfizer got a $1 billion criminal fine. Criminal and civil fines in the hundreds of millions of dollars in the pharmaceutical industry are common. No one should ever be required to take a product from an industry that routinely engages in criminal behavior.
The U.S. Department of Justice has sued them several times for criminal as well as civil crimes. Now, these are the same manufacturers who have complete immunity when it comes to vaccine injury. So they have no incentive whatsoever to worry about safety because the government has given them a pass.
There are laws in place already and bills for additional laws that would allow children to consent to vaccines. Here in North Carolina, we actually have a law that lets a child of any age consent to vaccines and other medical treatments. This is a blatant violation of the U.S. Constitution.
Amend the statute, amend the 1986 law, and continue to allow the pharmaceutical industry to have liability protection for the 7 vaccines that were covered when the law was passed. That's the MMR, DPT, polio. But not to cover the 9 vaccines that have been federally recommended since the statute passed. The influenza vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine, hepatitis A vaccine, varicella vaccine, Haemophilus B vaccine, a whole rafter of vaccines that very, very few countries in the developed world have gone along with the U.S. on.
It is heart-wrenching when you receive an email from a mother who lost their child and she thinks it's the vaccination. She goes to 60 doctors asking if they would be willing to analyze the autopsy samples, if they would be willing to investigate further to find answers, and they all say no. The death of your child could not be possibly due to the vaccine. You're asking the wrong question. How can they dismiss concern without even investigating?
For the pharmaceutical industry, moral, ethical, and even legal boundaries are merely financial considerations. No one goes to jail, there's a net profit, and so they keep engaging in the same criminal behavior.
In 1986, Ronald Reagan signed into law the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, and what it provided for was a compensation program for children who were injured or died as a result of vaccination. So it was absolutely acknowledged that vaccines cause catastrophic injury and death.
I don't like to call it a court because it's not a court. There's not normal rules of civil procedure. There's not a jury. You don't have justice being administered by your peers. It's a special master who's not a scientist, who's not a doctor, it's a lawyer, and that person listens to expert doctors and scientists about whether or not this is plausible, that this was caused by a vaccine. And in something like 4 out of 5 cases, the petitioner doesn't get compensated.
Government participates in the development of vaccines through public-private partnerships, and it also, at the end of the day, is liable for any kind of vaccine injuries.
The result of this 1986 law is you cannot go to court and sue Merck or Sanofi or Glaxo for a defective vaccine or for injuries that you believe were side effects that you were improperly warned, say. Typical tort claims that you can bring against a manufacturer in other medicines, Vioxx, Celebrex. You can't do that for a vaccine. The government stepped into the shoes of the pharmaceutical industry because of this 1986 law.
So this makes it very hard for the government to be an independent and impartial body. And so this is one of the problems, and restoring liability where it belongs with the manufacturer should make vaccines much safer.
Jonas Salk, the inventor of the inactivated polio vaccine, he made this argument to Congress in the hearings for the 1986 statute. He said, I'm very worried that this is going to take away the incentive for manufacturers to make vaccines safer.
In my view, Gardasil would have never happened prior to the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act.
So this program, although it's very difficult to win, over 3,200 families have prevailed in the injury compensation program, and the federal government has paid out $2.5 billion.
Person who's been permanently disabled with a serious neurologic condition, in a child autism, for example, or in an adult, a brain injury, the cost of care for that person could reach $75,000 or $100,000 a year or more.
So that gives you an idea of how serious these injuries are. That families get awards from very small amounts of $10,000 or $20,000, but up to millions of dollars for life care for life, because some of these children who are injured are devastated.
Part of the issue, of course, being that nobody is responsible for these kids once they get injured. Then you find out that your son actually does have a vaccine injury and you have no recourse whatsoever. And it is honestly like pulling teeth, trying to get a doctor to even agree that your child may have been affected adversely by vaccines, whether or not you watched it happen.
And if you don't like the decision that the DHHS employee made regarding your claim that you had a vaccine injury, it gets reviewed by another DHHS employee. And if you don't like that, you are barred from entering the court system. There is no way you can litigate your claim.
It's really hard to prove a vaccine injury. I believe that had we been allowing families to go to regular courts with regular juries, with regular rules of discovery and civil procedure over the last 25 years, I believe we wouldn't be seeing the crisis of childhood health that we're seeing today.
So I can't sue them because their creation of that vaccine did this to my kid. I'm financially responsible. They are not. It's just, this is supposed to be America. It's supposed to be free. We're supposed to have a liberal religious choice. We're supposed to be able to do what we feel is right within our own family. And with the government trying to tell us what to do, I mean, why call it a free country?
Robert Mendelsohn was a pediatrician and a medical doctor. And he came out in the mid-1970s in a very outspoken way about vaccines and about vaccine injuries. What he said was that, vaccines were a medical time bomb, and that we were trading the normal childhood illnesses that the majority of children they get over just fine. They develop lifelong immunity. We're trading the benefit of that lifelong immunity from normal childhood illnesses for a lifelong suffering of chronic diseases. And that's where we've gone.
We've been told time and time again by our state and local health officials, as well as the CDC, NIH, and the FDA, that vaccines are safe and effective. However, studies and science shows otherwise.
We should consider the benefits and the risks of vaccination. Unfortunately, our public health officials haven't got to that point, and they keep repeating that the benefits of vaccinations outweigh the risk, but we don't really have the studies to prove that.
2008, a medical doctor from Harvard University, Dr. Marcia Angell, who spent 20 years as an editor for the New England Journal of Medicine, went public and said we can no longer trust the medical authorities and the medical literature. The pressure from money involved with what gets published and what doesn't get published has just skewed the medical publishing industry to the point to where the medical literature is no longer reliable.
I've collected numerous studies. These are just a fraction of studies on lack of safety, lack of efficacy on vaccines. And these are mainstream published peer-reviewed papers. This is just a small stack of them. I've got many more, as do many of my colleagues. Why we are not being heard is for obvious reasons. We're outmoneyed by the industry, by the lobbyists.
The voices of independent scientists who raise issues about vaccine safety are often ignored, or we are personally attacked. And this is not good for science, and this is not good for scientific discourse.
Why are the pharmaceutical companies sponsoring most of the research? Medical research should not be about money, it should be about better medical care and how to improve the life quality of people, not how to make more money.
You can't trust what you hear from the CDC now. You can't trust what you hear from the FDA because those workers have been bought off. They're waiting for their jobs in the pharmaceutical industry. They're waiting for their jobs in the lobbying industry.
In 2010, there were over 330 vaccines either already on the market or in development. In early 2013, there are 250 vaccines either already awaiting approval from the FDA or in clinical trials.
There are hundreds of vaccines in the pipeline for a variety of conditions, including asthma and obesity and smoking, and the list goes on.
We have to change the way Washington works, or we'll never get transparency and we'll never get the truth. We'll continue to have studies that are set up to show a certain outcome, irregardless of what the realities are.
Where the rubber meets the road on this issue is in legislation. We need to become legislatively active. We need to oppose bills that, if passed, would require more vaccines of more people, and bills that, if passed, that would limit our right to make informed choices.
The only thing we can do as a population is to demand transparency, demand liability on the part of these manufacturers, and I think that we have to overturn Citizens United, and we also have to change campaign financing.
We need to support and promote the passage of bills that give us a right to make an informed choice.
The only way to change this is to demand it from the people who work for us, our legislators, and to change the way campaigns are financed.
I don't know what the end game is here. The direction we're moving is a very disturbing direction where we're seeing more and more vaccines required and our rights to make informed choices being taken away.
We don't have an intelligent media to at least demand answers of those in authority.
Within my news department at WBZ, I began to present the scientific research that was current and recent and new to news management. I also began to present them stories of vaccine-damaged children that I had come across in my scientific investigations. What I was told time and time again is that there is no story, that the science is settled, that there's no reason to present stories of this nature on TV because simply these are fringe stories. This is not representing the masses. And to me, it was surprising because I thought the media was supposed to be a voice of the people, and clearly at that point in my newsroom, it was not acting as a voice of the people.
The media in the UK do not want to know. They are followers of the government. They are put a D notice. Though the media have been threatened, I've been told this. I mean, for God's sake, media are there to show what's going on, to show life. It's not happening. It's such a cover-up. It's unbelievable.
You know, it's been said that a lie repeated often enough will become the truth. I like to think that the truth repeated often enough can do the same thing.
We need to be able to give our parents enough information to make informed choices. And I think that we need to actually stop with the vaccines at this point.
It's a problem if the government is going to pass laws that are going to coerce and are going to have vaccine squads looking for children who haven't been vaccinated, well, then we're in very, very big danger.
Just say no, right? Until your kid has to go to daycare or until your kid has to go to school, there is no law. There is no law that's forcing you to vaccinate your child.
I saw it. I felt it. I questioned it, but I didn't question loud enough. I allowed them to bully me, and that's something I have to live with.
48 states out of 50, there are religious exemptions. If as a matter of religious sentiment and consciousness, you cannot vaccinate your child, you have the right to file a religious exemption. And people are now doing that in higher numbers than they used to. In 19 states, there are philosophical exemptions. People can say, no, I'm not going to give the hepatitis B vaccine. I don't believe in that. I believe in polio. I don't believe in hepatitis B. And that's fine.
I think every parent has the right, responsibility, and should have the authority to make health choices about their children.
We need to ask people to look at this. You know, this is a serious medical intervention. Is it justified?
So I encourage the committee to endorse this bill and the legislature to pass the bill that will allow people to decline on vaccines or delay vaccines, not only due to their religious beliefs, but because of perhaps their ethical beliefs, their moral beliefs, their lifestyle, their philosophy, their conscience.
It's a fundamental human right to control your own health in that regard.
Does the science support this? Is there science to show this is safe for a day-old infant? The federal recommendation is that day-old infants get a vaccine against a sexually transmitted disease, hepatitis B.
It is a vast and uncontrolled human experiment.
So there are very serious questions, and is it possible that there could be lawsuits for fraud and for malfeasance? For overreaching by state authorities, yes, I think there are possibilities, and I'm very interested in pursuing them.
I really implore everyone to wake up and read for yourselves. Read for yourselves what the realities are about the vaccines, about the safety and the efficacy or the lack thereof.
You really need to think twice and really need to learn the risks that truly are there and that are involved if you decide to vaccinate your child.
Time is ticking, and our next generations are becoming more and more injured. The rates of autism and chronic diseases are skyrocketing out of control in the next generation.
Most of the epidemiology out there will not ever pick up the subset of children that will react to these vaccines.
Each of the individuals that get vaccinated, they have responses each time they're vaccinated, and those are cumulative, but vaccine safety does not require cumulative testing, and even the testing for single vaccines is very limited.
And all we are asking you to do as parents, as citizens, as representatives of injured children, is to allow parents to make a choice about medical procedures that are performed on their children in order that they may participate in the most fundamental right of citizenship, which is the school system.
We are now very powerful. All of us parents together in the UK, all of us parents in America, and in other countries, Australia, everywhere, we together are a powerful force, and nobody on this earth will ever harm our children and get away with it. I don't care who they are. I don't care how powerful they are. You have done the worst thing ever to a mother. You have harmed her child.
love.